I just dropped a whole tray of Cokes, Vera cried from the back of the room. They were victims of their own success. The very thing that had saved the diner was threatening to tear it apart. Alice felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. She had fought to save her family, but now she had to figure out how to keep them from killing each other. That weekend, Tommy came home from college, walking into the middle of the happy chaos. "Wow, Mom, this is amazing," he said, looking at the packed diner. "You're famous." Alice hugged him, grateful for the brief respite. "It's been crazy. How are things with you? How are your classes?" "Oh, fine," he said a little too quickly. He avoided her eyes, grabbing a menu. "So can I try one of these famous burgers?" Alice watched him, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She had been so focused on the diner's crisis that she hadn't noticed the quiet one brewing with her own son. The roar of the dinosaur had been so loud she realized with a pang of guilt that she hadn't been listening to the silence from the person who mattered most. Chapter 18. Ampere's Minor in Disappointment. The burger-fueled chaos was a perfect smokescreen. For 2 days, Tommy was able to deflect Alice's questions by pointing to the line out the door or the latest crisis involving a shortage of brioche buns. He was cheerful, helpful, and completely impenetrable. He bussed tables, refilled coffees, and charmed the new customers. But whenever Alice tried to steer the conversation toward school, he would artfully dodge. "So, that biology midterm you were worried about, she started during a rare lull on Sunday afternoon. Did you see that guy at table 3? Tommy interrupted, his eyes wide. He looked just like that actor from the old TV show, the one with the talking car." Alice let it slide, but the knot in her stomach tightened. It wasn't just evasiveness, it was the practiced skill of someone who had been avoiding a topic for a long time. That evening, after the last customer had gone and the diner was finally quiet, Greg stopped by to pick her up. She was exhausted, her feet throbbing, and her uniform smelling of fried onions. "You look like you just went 10 rounds with a heavyweight," he said, giving her a gentle kiss. "More like 1,000 rounds with 1,000 burgers," she sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But it's not the work that's getting to me. It's Tommy." She explained her concerns, the vague answers, the way he changed the subject. "It's like he's built a wall around himself and I can't find the door. I've been so busy putting out fires here, I'm worried my own house is burning down." Greg listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. "He's at a tough age, Alice. He's trying to be a man, and for a lot of guys, that means not admitting when you're in trouble, especially to your mom." He paused. Maybe he'd be willing to talk to someone who isn't his mom. Alice looked up at him. "You?" "I could try," he said with a shrug. "I'm not his dad. I'm not his boss. I'm just a guy who's been through college and messed up more times than I can count. We could go grab a burger. Somewhere else, obviously." She was hesitant. It felt like a surrender, an admission that she couldn't reach her own son. But she was also desperate. The wall Tommy had built was too high for her to climb alone. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay, maybe that's exactly what he needs." Chapter 19, The Architect and the Kid Greg picked Tommy up the next afternoon. The pretense was a trip to an architectural site on the other side of town, followed by a stop at a legendary local burger joint, a place that made its name on chili cheese fries and thick, malty milkshakes. The atmosphere in the car was thick, with a polite, masculine awkwardness. They talked about sports, they talked about cars. Greg pointed out interesting buildings, explaining the principles of cantilevered roofs and passive solar design. Tommy listened, nodding along, offering non-committal grunts of interest. It wasn't until they were sitting in a red vinyl booth, the table between them laden with greasy, glorious food, that Greg made his move. He did it without preamble, a clean, direct strike. So he said, after taking a long sip of his milkshake, "You're failing, huh?" Tommy froze a French fry halfway to his mouth. The color drained from his face. "What know who told you that?" "Nobody," Greg said calmly. "I'm just a pretty good architect. And one thing architects are good at is spotting a faulty foundation. Your foundation, my friend, is cracking." Tommy slumped back against the booth, the fight going out of him completely. The carefully constructed wall of fine and okay crumbled into dust. "It's not just failing," he mumbled, staring at the table. "It's everything. I hate my major. I'm no good at it." I sit in these lectures about cellular mitosis, and it's like the professor is speaking a different language. I'm supposed to be pre-med. Mom's been saving for it forever. She's so proud, telling everyone her son is going to be a doctor. He looked up at Greg, his eyes filled with a misery that was painful to see. How am I supposed to tell her? She just pulled the diner back from the brink of death. She's a hero. And her son, he's a complete total screw-up. He's gonna flunk out of college and spend the rest of his life asking people if they want fries with that. The self-loathing was so raw, so palpable that it filled the space between them. Greg didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He just let the confession hang in the air. When I was a sophomore in college, Greg said finally his voice quiet. I was a business major. My dad owned his own accounting firm, and I was supposed to take it over. The whole thing was laid out for me. He shook his head, a wry smile on his face. I was miserable, and I was failing calculus for the second time. I used to spend my nights in the architecture library just looking at the books, at the drawings. It felt like coming home. He looked at Tommy. Telling my dad I wanted to be an architect instead of an accountant was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He thought I was throwing my life away. For a while, I thought so too. So what happened? Tommy asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was rough, Greg admitted, but it was my life, not his. And eventually he came around. Your mom, she's tougher than my dad, and she loves you more than anything. The only thing that's going to truly disappoint her is you being miserable. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. The foundation was still cracked, but at least now the fault lines were out in the open. Chapter 20, The Conversation. When Greg's car pulled up to the apartment building, Alice was waiting by the window. She watched them get out her heart, a frantic drum against her ribs. They walked in, and the look on Tommy's face, a mixture of fear and exhaustion, told her everything. They sat at the small kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped him with his homework for years. This time there was no textbook between them, just a vast, terrifying silence. Greg gave Tommy's shoulder a supportive squeeze and then quietly retreated to the living room, giving them space. Mom Tommy began, his voice cracking on the single word, and then it all came tumbling out. The failing grades, the hatred for his major, the suffocating weight of her expectations, the shame. Alice listened, and with every word she felt a familiar, cold dread creeping into her veins. It was the fear every single parent has that they've pushed too hard or not hard enough, that they've somehow failed their child in a fundamental way. Her first instinct was to panic, to lecture, to demand a solution. All that money, Tommy. She started the words tasting like acid in her mouth. All the double shifts I worked. She saw him flinch, his shoulders hunching as if expecting a blow, and in that moment something shifted inside her. She saw not a rebellious teenager, but her own son drowning, and she was about to throw him an anchor instead of a life preserver. She took a deep breath, pushing down the fear. She remembered her own dreams, the ones she'd had to pack away in a box when her husband died. The dream of being a singer, of being something other than a waitress. Who was she to demand he follow a path that was making him miserable just because it was the one she had envisioned for him? When I was your age, she said, her voice soft, I wanted to be a singer more than anything in the world. I thought if I didn't make it, my life would be over, a total failure. Tommy looked up, his expression wary, confused. Well, I didn't make it, she continued, a sad, gentle smile on her face. I'm not singing in New York. I'm pouring coffee in Phoenix. For a long time, I felt like a failure, like I'd let everyone down, especially myself. She reached across the table and took his hand. It felt so big, so grown up in hers. But my life isn't over. It's a different life than the one I planned, and it's a good life because you're in it and because of the diner and Jolene and Vera. Tears welled in Tommy's eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what I want to do. It's okay not to know, she said, her own tears starting to fall. It's your life, honey, not mine. We'll figure it out, together. The resolution wasn't immediate or easy. It was a messy, ongoing negotiation. Tommy agreed to finish the semester and see a guidance counselor. He started exploring other classes, tentatively dipping his toes into art history and graphic design. The pre-med dream was laid to rest not with a bang, but with a quiet, mutual acceptance. A few weeks later, Alice came home from a long shift to find Tommy at the kitchen table surrounded by sketch pads and charcoal pencils. He was drawing a look of intense, quiet focus on his face. He was sketching the diner. He'd captured the slant of the afternoon light, hitting the counter the weary slump of Henry's shoulders, the controlled chaos of the pass-through window. He had captured its soul. She stood in the doorway watching him, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. The roar of the dinosaur had saved her diner. But it was the quiet scratching of a pencil on paper and the courage to listen to the silence that had saved her son. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that was a victory far more magnificent. It was shattered not by something from the sky, but by the roar of construction equipment from across the street. For weeks they watched as the derelict laundromat that had been an eyesore for years was torn down and replaced by something sleek, shiny, and vaguely menacing. It opened on a Monday. A slash of neon light cut through the pre-dawn gloom, spelling out its name, the Chrome Comet.